All right, what are some of the things that you discussed at your table about those here passages? Micah?
We really spent most of the time talking about one, and that was the mentality the disciples had after they were punished by the Sanhedrin for essentially refusing to stop talking about Jesus.
Okay.
They walked away and they were rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer. And our response to that was, well, that's definitely not how we feel about it. That is 100% not my reaction.
Okay.
And I doubt it's any of yours.
Okay. We don't normally walk away from persecution rejoicing. Okay? Great point. What else?
A theme in our table was that oftentimes it's keeping your eyes open, whether you're in the middle of a desert, wondering why God put you there.
Okay. Like
Philip. Or, whether you're witnessing on trial, right? Or wherever you might be.
Okay.
The fact that you're trusting that God has a reason for where you are in the moment and
Okay.
letting Him direct.
Okay. So what I've heard so far is we need to have an attitude of rejoicing even in the midst of persecution. We need to keep our spiritual eyes and ears open to the surroundings that we're in. What else?
We have the words of life.
Okay. We have the words of life. Okay?
I tell a story, just a quick story. Leanne Weedy was here. I don't know if she shared this specifically when she was here, but she shared with me that her friends, her neighbors, her fellow church members are having to be taking care of her cat, but they're refusing to leave Kiev. She's like, no, just set the cat outside and flee to Poland, go somewhere, right? And they're in their 60s, so well, we have nowhere to go. This is our home. We have reason to stay, and that is to keep ministering to people who desperately need the gospel. So we're staying. And if God, and then you think about eternal life, if God is going to see that we die here at the hands of the Russians, we're okay with that because we know we have life eternal. We're gonna be okay. Right?
Okay.
So it's really taking a modern day story or reality of this couple's life.
Okay.
Seeing it, essentially lived out through the truth.
Okay. So maybe the theme of today's lesson is we have to keep an eternal perspective. Not focusing on what's happening here in the world we know, but in the eternal perspective. Okay? Anything else?
It's just interesting. I was reading my study Bible again about the Ethiopian eunuch. He traveled all that ways from Ethiopia all the way to Jerusalem. Wouldn't have been allowed in the temple because of his physical defect. Right? So he couldn't even go to the Gentile court. And on his way back in the desert, while reading the Bible, is where God meets with him.
Okay.
And so there wasn't this huge cultural acclimatization, right? It was just, do you understand? This is the same word, the same Bible, the same gospel.
Yep.
You need it the same as I do. And so, if this was put into a modern film, there'd have to be some sort of well, we're going to change this part of it so that it fits the Ethiopian culture.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that there's none of that there.
Yeah.
When the Spirit works in anybody's heart, doesn't matter where they're from,
Okay.
the outcome is still the same.
Okay. So if you had to put that into a one-sentence principle, what would that look like?
God can get you no matter who you are, where you are, or what's your circumstance.
Okay.
As they went. That's
Okay.
other phrases like he sent the lepers, and as they went, they were healed. And as he went,
Which goes back to Matthew 28, which says,
go.
no, that's not what it says. That's an incorrect interpretation. It says, as you go.
As you go.
Oh, does it?
Yes, it's an active, it's a continuing statement. It's as you go into all the world, proclaim the gospel. So as they went, what did they do? I expect God in the unexpected. We don't know where that unexpected place is going to be. Yeah.
So, probably almost 20 years ago now, maybe a little less, I connected with a young man reading the Bible on the bench outside of, well, the B2 store now, but Family Fair in Hudsonville. His name was Michael, red hair. He and I connected. I asked him, hey, what are you reading? He was reading Isaiah, actually.
Okay, this is getting weird now.
Well, we started talking about Christ, and now we connected. He ended up working for us. He was a terrible worker. He worked for us for a period of time. This week, I'm in Family Fair. I'm doing a miserable job of putting pop cans in the return, right, and trying to get 10 cents for these lousy pop cans. And who walks in with a little bag of cans but Michael, now 20-ish years older. I say, hey, Michael, how you doing? Right? And he right away says, oh, hey, Tim. And he's an odd kid. He's an odd guy. But he says, hey, it's good to see you. You know, I almost came to your service, your Easter service on Sunday, but you know, I was tired and didn't end up going. Anyway, he was really brief and really short, but it was really a God thing to connect with him in the same exact, not the same store, but
Sure.
the
Sure.
same place, I should say, but the same store here 20 years later, and just to reestablish a connection.
Yeah.
You know, whether God's working in his life, he sees me and thinks Christ, I guess,
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah.
Said, oh,
And that's a good
Easter.
thing.
I was going to go. Like, I didn't need to do that, but I was going to go to church, you know.
As you're saying, these doggone cans.
Oh, I'm struggling because every one of those things is not received.
Well, early on in our discussion, we talked about 3 principles. Do you remember these? Be the light. Matthew 5:16. Come and see. Andrew goes and finds his brother Peter. Go and tell. How did you see those 3 principles play out in what you read in the here questions?
I mean, I guess you just saw the apostles in the other early church. They were constrained, right, by the gospel. They couldn't keep quiet.
Yep.
Even if they were going to die, they were going to die preaching.
James and John, any of the disciples lived as the light, lived as the salt, if you want to use that application from that same passage. Come and see. Tim with Michael. Who knows? Maybe he'll come up, or maybe he'll come one Sunday. Go and tell. Obviously, the Ethiopian eunuch. Have you ever stopped to think about that? He's in the chariot, and he's speaking with the Ethiopian eunuch. Did you catch the irony of the last part of that story? What happens? He baptizes him, and what happens? He says he's immediately back in Jerusalem. Now, if I'm Philip, I'm thinking, now, wait a minute. How does that work? That'll be one of the questions we can ask Jesus when we get to heaven.
And how was he discipled? That's the other
Yeah.
thing. Like, wait,
Yeah.
Philip didn't stick around. How
Yeah.
was he discipled?
But they feel like the eunuch is who took the gospel to Africa.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's kind of like Paul Harvey. You know, we're waiting for the rest of the story. So.
Wasn't there a contingency of God followers in Africa from the Queen of Sheba?
Sheba, yeah.
Could well have been. Could well have been. Here's a little acronym that may be of... Go ahead,
I
Helen.
wonder how we got a copy of Isaiah.
He was rich. He bought it.
Oh, okay.
Well,
The other
if he was a eunuch, he may have gotten it out of the royal library.
Right. The other bit too was, so it sounded like he was not only just like a servant, but a royal servant, but he was up there in the echelons, and the other part of it was, he was a Jewish proselyte, right? Why else would he be going to Jerusalem?
Right.
And so evidently there were a number of Gentile proselytes in Ethiopia.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that there must have been influences in his life prior to that. Okay? Just as Tim is an influence in the life of Michael, or you're an influence in the life of someone else, and you may not see the fruit of that experience. You're planting the seed, someone else waters, someone else cultivates, someone reaps the harvest. So we don't know which of those parts of the pattern we're in. As I think of sharing the gospel or evangelism, there's an informational piece to it. Okay, what's the informational piece?
Facts and history.
God's Word. Okay, and more specifically, the informational piece of the gospel is found in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, I passed on of first importance to you the gospel that Jesus Christ died for our sins, was buried, and rose again on the third day. So do we have the informational piece? I'm referring to the, 10 of us that are in this room. Are we all clear on the informational piece?
To a fault.
To a fault, okay? So, check. The second piece, I would say, is motivation. What's the motivational piece of the gospel?
We have a need for a Savior.
Okay, we had a need for a Savior. What else? Pardon me? Go and tell. Okay.
I don't know what to say first. There's love and there's a command.
Okay. Okay. Bottom line motivation of the gospel is what?
We have good news to share.
What?
We have good news to share.
We have good news to share?
Salvation.
We've been commanded.
Okay, we have good news to share. We also have bad news to share. And the good news and the bad news both relate to what?
Glory.
It seems to me that our motivation, at least to a degree, now all of these other things are true, but at least to a degree is eternity, right? Because if this is all there is, then let's go eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But there is an eternity, and if our motivation is eternity, what does that say about evangelism?
It's the most important thing.
It's the most important thing I can do, is to share with my friends, my family, my coworkers, my whatever it is, the fact that we have hope, we have good news. There is bad news, that we are sinners and we need a Savior. We need to go and tell. Okay, does that make sense? So the question then becomes, do I have the motivation?
This was convicting when it was the C's, right? Because not only conviction that it's true, but compassion to care about
Yeah.
souls. That was one that hit me.
Yeah. Do I really care enough about that person to say, you're in trouble?
When I was reading, one of the things that hit me in the book was, if you're not sharing with them, you obviously don't help them.
Okay. Okay.
Because you just convicted them to hell. If nobody ever shares with them, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Now, okay, that's one of those. I was listening to a sermon yesterday by John MacArthur, and he was talking about the sovereignty of God and the will of man. And it's one of those that we ultimately can't answer. Is God going to save everybody he wants to save? Okay, so it doesn't depend upon me, right? Does he say go and tell?
Yes.
Does that depend upon me?
In a way.
In a way, that's exactly what the young guy said that was answering that question. So that's one of those things that we say, I believe that firmly in the sovereignty of God in salvation. And yet God has called us to be a tool even as Paul says, how will they hear without a preacher? So, how do you get to the bottom of that?
Well, if you don't do it, God will send somebody else. That's
Okay.
the whole point.
Okay?
But the point I was trying to make is that it was kind of slapping me in the face in terms of, if you don't do it, then you obviously don't have compassion or love for that person. You don't have,
Okay.
you decided that they're not worthy of your time, you're whatever. Can God send somebody else? Yeah, God can send somebody
Okay.
else.
So if I'm in the store and I don't share my faith with that cashier that's checking me out, are they doomed to hell?
No, somebody else can say so.
Okay. I had a guy tell me that. I said, you and I disagree on that one, sorry, but okay, so I don't want to belabor that, but I think a lot of times we have the information, don't we? So the question is, do I have the motivation to turn a conversation to spiritual things, to pull out my Bible? I can't control the results of that, but I can try to turn that conversation. Now, that's where number 3 comes in. Do you and I practice evangelism? Not enough.
I think I probably rely on I'll just be faithful in my conversations as they come, as opposed to going out and sharing. And I think it relies on the idea of comfort.
Okay, that's a great word.
I don't believe someone is skeptic type personality. Basically told me, if you believe hell is real, then why aren't you on the street right now, proclaiming that to people?
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, it was an indictment that I didn't believe as much as I should, but on the other hand, there also are, the fact is that you're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like assaulted by some of the people that would
Yeah.
yell at us at Grand Valley.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was the greatest way to share
Yeah.
the gospel. But the point is if you're doing nothing, then my friend was right. I
Okay.
don't really believe
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Now, Jason, going back to your comment about my comfort, the flip side of that is my laziness. I used to tell my cross-country runners, you will make time for anything that's important to you. If running is important to you, you will find a time to do it. If eating is important to you, you will find a time to do it. If evangelism is important to you, you'll find a time to do it. Now, okay.
For me, too often is I'll have a conversation and then they go say, oh, I should have.
Yeah.
And it's that you're in the moment and you don't. You just don't automatically turn it. You don't.
Yeah.
And I'm trying really desperately to make sure that when I have all these conversations, because I'm out.
We're in the middle of practice, Leanne.
You can
thank me later.
No. And trying to turn those conversations. How do I go
Whoop.
from just a casual conversation?
Sorry.
Leanne.
Thank me later.
We'll come back to that.
Do you remember when we first met and we went to that horrible party and everybody was dreadful clothes? And I was a little bit scared and you told me not to worry about it because you had my back. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
And if anyone tried to get to me, you would have stopped them, right? And when you and SJ were in that car wreck, what did you do to the airbag?
Stop it.
You stopped it. You stopped it. This team is your family, Michael. You have to protect them from those guys, okay? Listen. Tony here's your quarterback, all right? You protect his blind side. When you look at him, you think of me, how you have my back, how you have his, okay? All right, Tony, go back. All right. Uncle Lumpy here is your tailback. When you look at him, you think of SJ and how you've never let anyone or anything hurt him. You understand me? All right, go back. Got it?
What about Collins and Mr. Tony?
They can be on the team too. Are you gonna protect the family, Michael?
Yes, ma'am.
Good boy. And go have some fun. trusting him doesn't work, Bert. Doesn't trust men. His experience, they pretend to care about you till they disappear.
Wanna run a play?
SJ, you're gonna want to get this. Come on, Michael, come on. Woo! Yes! Michael! Bad boy.
Okay. What would you say to him?
You should get to know your players, Bert. He tested 98% in protective instincts. I said you could thank me later. It's later, Bert.
Now, you might chuckle and say, why would you show something like that as it relates to evangelism? Did you see any principles there?
Get to know your players.
Got to get to know your players, Bert.
Get to know people around them.
You got to get to know the people around you. What else?
Just yelling at people might not be the best way to do it.
Kind of relates to what you were just talking about, right? Okay, what else?
Viewing others as family.
Okay. We belong to the family of God.
There's a little phrase there that he said, he's used to men pretending to care about you and then leaving.
Okay?
So part of it is just being present.
Yeah. What did the coach say after she had gone out there? She had talked to the players, and the players are all watching her walk back. Pardon me for that part, but what does he say to the team? Want to run a play? I can picture Jesus with the disciples. Want to run a play? He sends them out 2 by 2, and they come back, and they've had all. So I realize this wasn't designed as an evangelistic movie. But I think there are some principles that we can at least think about as we see this, that we do have to know our players. How many of you would say that you have the gift, the spiritual gift of evangelism? Okay, so a half. Yeah. Okay, so the rest of us are off the hook, right?
Nope.
Because, well, we don't have that spiritual gift.
I took the assessment and did not come up. I'll pull that out on Judgment Day.
Okay. Yeah. So let's just say that the other 10 of us don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism that Jason does. So Jason is one of these guys down here. He's the go and tell guy. Does that let us off the hook? If not, what does that say to us? Practice? It says, maybe if I don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism, I can call my friend and say, hey, we're having a men's breakfast at our church. Come on along, just have breakfast, and maybe I just get them into that setting. Out there on the sign-up table this morning is a sign-up sheet for a fishing trip in June. And the first time I met Matt Potter was sitting in a fishing boat in Lake Erie, and he wanted to talk about justification by faith alone. I'm thinking, I'm out here to catch walleye.
Because he knows the information.
Yeah, exactly.
He was in a lost.
Yeah. So it might be that I have to implement that come and see strategy. It may be that in my work or in my community or in my neighborhood, I just have to be the light. So though I don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism as such, I still have those opportunities. I want to spend a couple minutes. I forgot the G. Where'd my marker go? After you got the information, was Michael motivated? Did he practice?
Yep.
So what's the G? Come on, think football. Why do we practice?
Goal.
No. Where do we score the goal? In the...
It's like end zone.
Sorry.
So it's not a car.
You know, I don't know if you've all been on a team, but it's kind of like cake with no frosting, okay? Practice with no game is like the cake with no frosting. The game time is where you put all the practice into play. So the question then becomes, when it comes to evangelism, am I in the game? Am I going to put to use and realize that I have spent the last 50 years of my life in that process of working with coaches and athletes. So I use you can come up with other analogies that fit you better, but thoughts, questions, comments?
I just was thinking that, I don't know, this class has been really a blessing. Church has been a blessing. But the last couple of weeks, it's just been, I had more time at work, and God's given me, I've talked to almost every single person at work. And it's gotten a lot easier as time's gone on. Like, it just becomes part of who I am. Whereas in the past, I would have just said things here or there. It became very awkward for me because I wasn't used to it. But like, just sat down with my attending because I had a no-show, and I was like,
Okay.
so, we talked about, he's gone to church, Catholic. So explain to me, how are you made right with God?
That's a pretty good question.
He just looked at me and was like, well, that's... I've known him for 3 years.
Sure,
So we have
sure,
a relationship.
sure.
And I know he's Catholic and hasn't been going, so I'm just curious, like, are you going to earn that, or how do
Yeah.
you get that?
Yeah.
So it was just like, I don't know, practice, just do it.
Yep. Well, guess what? It's practice time. I need 2 volunteers. 2 guys. You're off the hook for the moment. Micah, how about Jason and Micah? Okay.
Table represented.
Micah, you are the believer,
Joy.
and Jason is the non-believer. Okay, so read your little script there.
Non-believer.
We're going to have Micah read it.
rake or something? I'm supposed to.
No, well, that's all right. Go ahead. Pretend. Go ahead and read your... Yeah, read it so they know what you're doing.
I'm in my yard, very busy with yard work. A neighbor is walking their dog and interrupts your work to say hello. Then asks if you can talk a minute.
You are walking your dog through the neighborhood. You've wrestled with where you stand with God over the last couple of months. You've noticed that your neighbor has fish magnets on their car. I would not notice that.
Or do I have fish magnets?
You know this neighbor must have some type of relationship with God. Maybe they can help you sort through this as you are weary of the battle.
Okay.
Sorry, I was doing yard work. What are those magnets on your car?
They actually belong to a different neighbor of mine.
Come on, guys, play with me.
I feel the need to go with them sometimes.
Oh, what kind of trips?
Oh, fishing. hence the magnets. He likes to go out on the lake. He has this big collection of lures. He likes to talk about which ones work where, and I just
Okay.
kind of nod.
Okay.
It's fun. It's fun.
That's cool. Do you go fishing often?
Once or twice a summer, maybe.
Okay.
Do you fish?
I love fishing. It's great.
Well, then I should connect you with my neighbor.
That would be awesome. What do you talk about when you fish?
Well, the lures, which I think I mentioned already,
Uh-huh.
and kind of whatever's going on in life. We know each other. We go to the same church, so that's.
Oh yeah, church.
Yes.
That's cool. How, like,
Thing.
what is church?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we go. Church is well, I mean, legally it's a tax-free entity, but what it is, besides the law, is it's a gathering of people who believe in the scriptures and meet regularly to talk about it, or, as I like to phrase it, a hospital for some people.
Oh, interesting. You said scriptures. What is that?
Scripture is a book that was written by God to tell us about Him, because on our own, people are far too, silly to figure out that sort of thing on their own. But I know I am, and most of the people I've been around immediately justify that assumption. So,
Okay. You said a lot of words there that I don't know. So what do you mean justify?
well, by that I mean when I assume people aren't going to figure out about God on their own, they immediately prove me right, as I prove myself right.
Okay. And you said he wrote a book.
Yes.
Where can I get this book?
Well, the internet.
Okay.
Your local bookstore, and we have like 30 in the house. I could probably just give you one if you want one.
Okay. And is it just like a story, or what is it?
Well, there are stories in it, but it's more than that. When it was written, it was written by people, but with God's inspiration. He had a message he wanted to get across, so he more or less tapped a bunch of people on the shoulder and said, "Write now." And what they were writing down were the messages he wanted to communicate to people. Like I said, we are far too silly, and that's the gentlest word I can use for it, to figure this sort of stuff out on our own. He had to more or less whack us over the head with it. And
Okay.
tell us.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting guy.
Agreed.
Do you
He
know?
has a sense of humor too. I've noticed this in my own life.
Do you know this guy?
Personally? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, where does he live?
Well, if you want to be technical, he's spirit. He doesn't have a
Okay.
physical body and permeates all of reality, which he created. But,
So how can
He
you write a
does.
book?
well, he tells people to write things down.
But I thought you said that people were silly.
Yes, which is why he needed to tell them what to write.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Now,
Well done.
what would, if you were in one of those two positions, what might you have said, done?
I think at one point I probably would have said, well, why don't you just come and see?
Okay.
Either come to church or why don't we just read it together? Because it is kind of a big thing to ask. We had a friend that we gave a Bible to.
Mhm.
We also were like, do you want to come read it with us?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because on your own, it's kind of a big task to say, I don't know any of these words. I
Okay.
don't know where to start. Maybe I'll start at the beginning.
Justification, permeation, and all.
I don't know where to start. So
Micah operates on a different plane than some of us do.
Let it be noted, when I was talking about justification, I was using the regular.
So, like, it's usually a relationship. It's somebody you
Sure,
know who
sure.
brings you along,
Sure.
generally. And
Okay.
so that's typically why I think here's a tract, here's a Bible.
Sure.
I mean, it can be helpful, but usually it's why don't you come with me and I'll show you.
One of the things that this said on Jason's sheet was, this neighbor must have some relationship with God. Maybe they can help you sort through this as you are weary of the battle. So as Micah listens to him and can sense some of those questioning, another way of saying that's, what do you think, or who do you think God is? And turning around and asking a question, what have you ever been to church? What do you think church is? Rather than trying to give all the answers, turning it around and trying to place it back on him. Okay? Now, why do we practice?
I think a lot of times people think of evangelism as maybe one of two things. They think of it as the person standing in the middle of a busy city just yelling, "You all are condemned, repent, repent." Or they think of it as somebody who's preaching to masses, at an event or things like that. And what I've found, I mean, just a preface too, like, even though it's in the top 3, I have evangelism. I still have to practice. It's not like I just have the gift and can do it.
Sure.
But the way I've found is that being able to strike up a conversation and ask good questions that are not just yes or no questions really helps guide the conversation to a pinpoint of where you want to go.
Okay.
And so part of the practice is, I mean, we all have to talk to people at some point for something. And so how do you want to use that conversation? Sometimes there's a time and place for it. Sometimes there's, it just doesn't call in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But, for me who has to talk to people all day, it's how can I ask a certain set of questions that maybe get me to a certain place where we can talk about these things. So I find that I ask more questions than I do the talking, and I try and do that because that enables them to share their heart and soul. And then you just pick up on key things and what do you mean by that? Or I think yours like, why did you say it that way?
Yeah.
And that's why you practice, because if you're not comfortable asking questions, right? I mean, I love people, so I don't get tired of people. I know my wife gets tired of people all the time. But it's like you have to practice the rhythm of asking questions so that you can then direct the conversation.
So have you ever done something for the first time? It's a silly question, isn't it? How did you feel the first time you tried to do something that you really weren't sure you could do? Anxious?
Thoroughly awkward.
Awkward? Okay. So what did you do to get over that?
Laugh.
You quit, right? Okay.
Ask for help.
Ask for help?
Keep doing it.
You did it until you were able to do it? You asked for help, or maybe you had somebody do it with you? That kind of thing? I remember when I was in college, I don't like to be upside down. Well, in our stunts and tumbling class, one of the things we had to do to get an A was to be able to do a flip. Like I said, I don't like to be upside down. My body was not created for that position. And I was scared to death. We had a mini tramp that we had to go off to do this. And I mean, I belly flopped so many times that I practically wore the mat out. Until one day, I realized that when you hit that mini tramp, if you throw your arms forward, it will flip your legs over your head. Now, I didn't look very Olympic-like, but at least I did the flip. And once I did it, I thought, oh, I can do that. Well, it's kind of like that with evangelism, isn't it? So I need 2 of the feminine gender who would volunteer.
Sorry, we're out.
Otherwise, I might have to volunteer you. We're a friendly crowd, really, we are.
I had a feeling it was going that way.
Come on up. Don't worry, we got lots more. What happens here stays here. Okay, would you want to read yours first?
I got Facebook Live.
It is being taped already, so. And you have the believer, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're having lunch with a coworker, you've worked with them for a couple of years, you know very little about their extended family. At lunch, your coworker reveals that their sibling has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Things don't look so good.
Mine says, you're having lunch with a coworker. You've worked with him, her for a couple of years and have observed messages of faith on their desk. You've listened to stories of weekend adventures that include church activities. You've heard them say that others that they were praying for them. Your sibling has recently been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. You've never spent much time thinking about afterlife issues. this has stirred the pot. So I suppose I should go first, right?
Whichever.
Hey, how was your weekend?
It was good. We went to church, had a good day worshiping. How was your weekend?
Well, actually, really horrible. Just found out my was it sibling, right? Sibling,
Yeah.
okay. My brother's got pancreatic cancer. It's not looking good.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know if he's gonna live. Doctor's not giving them much hope.
It's so hard. Does he have hope in Christ?
I don't know anything about that, really. I haven't had any conversations about, in our family, about religion or anything. We don't do that.
What do you think happens after death?
You know, I really don't know. You know, like I said, we don't live in a Christian family. We were not raised Christian, you know, and it's just not part of our life. So I really don't know what happens after death. But you know, I'm starting to kind of wonder, you know, what's going to happen to him.
Yeah. Yeah. How is he feeling with this? Is he scared?
Oh yeah, you know, his wife is just like petrified. They got little kids to take care of, and what's going to happen when he's dead, you know, and you know, who's going to take care of them? I don't know. So I don't really know, you know, what's going to happen.
Can I pray with you?
Yeah, I mean, anything that will help. If you think that'll help, let's do this, you know?
I mean, God is our healer, and he heals not only our physical issues, but he works in our hearts, and he gives us spiritual life.
I don't know if it'll help, but at this point, you know, anything is a good thing, right? You help out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Very good, thank you. Any yes? Any thoughts, questions, comments? What would you reinforce? What would you do differently?
It's hard to turn the conversation to more of a spiritual thing
Mm-hmm.
beyond just a normal, I'm sorry to hear that.
Sure.
Sometimes
Sure.
you could say, I'll be praying for you, which,
Uh-huh.
you know, in last 10 years, it's not uncommon to say, oh, thoughts and prayers are with you know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But some sort of a question that says, well, where do you look for strength in hard times?
Okay.
What do you do?
Sure. Okay. So, as you think about the conversation that they had, and they pray together at the end, what might the future of conversations between those two look like?
Asking constantly, how are things?
How's your brother doing? Okay,
I
so
don't just care to get her saved. I do care about
sure,
what's going on.
sure. So that one conversation isn't the, okay, I got to evangelize in this, 2-minute window. It's an ongoing process. Okay, so was that hard? Mostly because everybody's watching, yeah.
In both skits, it seems that even when the person playing the part of the Christian knows the setup of the other party, it's almost like the unbeliever both times had to drag it out of the Christian. And it's like, okay, maybe we should be more ready. With people struggling, people have heartbreaks, we need to be ready to not make them drag it out of us.
Where do we get ready? We practice.
This is the kind of scenario that I run into all the time in the hospital. This is like a
Yeah.
real time. And then you do ask them to pray with them because they have the same attitude. They have like anything will help.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
please.
Just the fact that you're
Sure.
talking to me and not walking away.
Yeah.
Any time of day.
We have a coach's Bible study that meets over in Muskegon at the Grand Traverse Pie Company, and back probably close to a year ago now, I walked in one morning, and the gal who serves the coffee, she asked me what I wanted, and I said this, and I said, how are you doing? She said, I'm doing awful. I just got a phone call that my sister was involved in a car accident. She's got massive injuries, and I said, well, we got a group of guys that are meeting here in a few minutes. If you would come over to our table, we'd pray for you. So she did, and we did, and there are 6 of us, and every one of those guys at one time or another has gone up to her and asked her again, how's your sister doing? So it's an ongoing conversation. I don't think she's a believer, but we continue to try to fill into that conversation. So it's not a one-time thing. Okay, Matt, which one are you?
Believer.
Okay.
Should I read the scripture?
Sure.
You recently lost your job to downsizing after 15-year career with your company. You have a great network of friends in the field. You set up a meeting with one friend at Starbucks to see what doors God might open for you. Your friend went through a job loss and bankruptcy 8 years ago and is frantic for your situation. Your trust that God will handle the situation is strong.
Okay, mine says your friend called asking you to meet at Starbucks. He lost his job after a 15-year career with his company. You're supportive. Networking opportunities can offer him possibilities. You have experienced a job loss 8 years ago and had to declare bankruptcy, so you're frantic for your friend's finances and his marriage, and possible loss of home because you went through a crisis like that before. So,
Tim, thanks for meeting me here.
yeah, man,
Hey, man.
for sure. I'm here for you.
I heard what happened. I know what you went through 8 years ago.
A while back. Horrible. I'm glad you remember. Yeah. It's the worst.
But yeah, no, God closed that door, and I'm looking to see what doors He might open for me next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's tough. Man, I went through that. It's horrible. When you lose all your income, and man, my job loss caused me to almost lose my home, and it was just the pits, man. So what are you doing? What are you going to do next? I mean, I'd love to network with you, help you find opportunities. I've got lots of connections. So, but man, you just got to be devastated.
Well, we're not devastated. We're trusting
What?
God. We have enough money to make it through this month and a little bit of next month.
Wow.
My wife's picking up a little gig to help us, but I'm trusting God. I mean, He brought me this far.
Yeah.
I left there with my head held high, and I trust that He's got something for me next.
Aren't you ticked that your employer, he just let you go? Did it come out of the blue or what?
It was a little bit of a surprise,
Yeah.
yes. But like I said, I have a clear conscience,
Yeah.
and for all I know, that door closed because God has something even better for me.
Really? Wow.
And
So I don't get that. That doesn't make any sense, because when I went through the loss I went through, man, I was beside myself most of the time. So how does that make sense? How do you make sense out of it, even in spite of such a huge loss?
yeah, I'm not saying there's not going to be hard stuff too, but He's the one. He directed the end from the beginning. He knows where this is all going to end up, and He forgave me of a huge mountain of sin. He gave me my wife, my kids. He gave me this life, and if He says that chapter's done, I'm following Him into the next chapter.
Wow. Wow.
Where else would I go?
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting, because I don't know, I've never heard of that before, that kind of perspective. Because, man, with most of the guys who lost jobs, when I lost mine, man, their lives just kind of fell apart. Some of them, got a start, in another place, a few months or a few years later, but it was hard. That recession was tough.
Well, I'm not saying there's not hard things.
Yeah.
But He's faithful. He provides for us. We've never gone a day hungry yet. You know what? You like to fish, Tim, don't you?
I do, man. Yeah.
What are you doing the first week?
Good at it.
What are you doing the first weekend of June? Well, our church is doing this outing to Lake St. Clair.
Really? Well, I heard that's a great thing.
Okay, whiplash. Good. Okay, thoughts, comments?
I think it just flowed from what he'd been thinking and praying about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not like, all right, what do I gotta put on? I gotta put on this costume, right?
Yeah.
To show my friend what a great Christian I am.
Sure.
He was just honest. Right? If you're real with what is inside, you show the vulnerability, the sin in the past, and where you're looking.
Yeah.
I think that speaks.
Do hard things happen to good people?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
do hard things happen to Christians? So I think to some degree there's this danger out there that non-believers see Christians and they think, well, they're Christians, so nothing bad ever happens to them. So when Matt called, was there a real need in Matt's life? What was the need? He needs a job. So he's going to call somebody who he thinks can network and help him meet the need that he has, but realizing that ultimately it's not Tim that's going to meet the need, it's God that's going to meet the need. Okay? Any other?
I think, so like, one example is when we lost our second son, that was hard, right? And it was interesting how we had lots of people reaching out to us that weren't Christian, that we've known a lifetime ago. And I think one of the things that we felt pretty compelled is that people kept saying like, well, you must feel hopeless. We kept saying we actually don't, right? Which, I mean, probably the first couple of months, yeah, we felt very hopeless.
Sure.
But even through that, there was opportunity. And I feel like one of the things that Lindsay and I kept saying is we don't know how non-Christians go through tragedy because we have hope. I have no clue what they do, right? And so for us, it was like a compelling, like we have to share something because if they don't have this hope, I mean, I know what it's like to spiral, and the only reason I did this because I had Christ first and foremost, but then I had friends and family who were helping keep me up. So it's like, I think part of that is everyone goes through hard things. Everyone goes through difficult times. Everyone has circumstances that are way beyond their control. And it's how can you empathize and relate, and then how do you provide hope to the hopeless?
Sure.
It goes back to that word light, being the light.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that happen in your life, and we'd like to just bury them. I mean, I've lost 2 children, and you'd like to bury that. And
Sure.
But those experiences are something that I can use to help other people who are in that same situation, who are having the same difficulty. And people will look at you very strange when you say, if something happens, it's God's will. Like when I was traveling across the United States by myself with a little trailer behind me, people are like, aren't you worried about snow? Aren't you worried about, I said, if they close the road down, I hunker down wherever I am and enjoy the time I'm there. It's because I'm supposed to be there. And having that perspective for other people, they just look at you like, you must be the bravest person in the world. I say, no, I'm not. Actually, I'm really not brave at all. I just have God.
Sure.
So I think all of those things that happen to us are our opportunities to be light to other people. Be that like, okay, yeah, I'm moving back to Michigan. I don't have a job. I just sold most of my stuff. I don't have a place to live, but it'll be okay. God's going to take care of me. He's taken care of me this far. Why would he not continue to take care of me?
Well, realizing that, we gave them 3 minutes to have this conversation, which, might have taken an hour in a coffee shop somewhere. Matt, how did you feel during that conversation?
Well, I guess even knowing that's truly just Pastor Tim and talking to us, having a hard time finding the way to flip the script to the gospel, even with a pure setup. So that's why I shifted gears to the come and see.
Okay.
Would be easier.
Which takes me back to what we were talking about before. The first time you did it, what did you feel? What was the word?
Awkward.
Awkward. Did it feel awkward? You had to flip the script somehow, so I'm going to use the one that... So as we... Will that become... Now, Dan, come on up here. This isn't on a script, so this is impromptu. Okay? I'm a non-believer. My uncle just passed away.
Okay.
He was a drunk. He was a womanizer. He wasn't an axe murderer, but that's about the only thing he had done. Okay? So you and I work in the hospital together, and we're just chit-chatting back and forth. And so you start the conversation.
Okay. So what's going on? How things?
Oh man, this has been one of the most challenging weeks I've ever had.
I'm sorry to hear that. Tell me about it.
Man, well, I only have one uncle, and we were very close. We loved to fish together.
Here, let's make this more natural. We're actually sitting in chairs looking that way.
Okay, all right.
Because guys don't look at each other when they talk.
See, he's a natural at this. So, we were just very close to one another, and we loved to be together. And, he had cancer just a short time, and he passed away this week.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did you guys have any heads up at all?
Well, we knew he had been diagnosed with cancer, but, cancer, that takes months or years to kill somebody.
Yeah, it's hard because doctors aren't God, right? We don't know when we're going to go.
Yeah, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we knew when we were going to go?
Maybe. Sometimes it's nice not to know.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's true. I always have loved a good surprise.
Who do you look to in your life when you are struggling like that?
Well, I used to watch Oprah. Dr. Phil has, he's had some good advice sometimes.
How so? What?
Well, it just seems like he comes up with some really witty sayings, and I guess I don't know who I go to when that happens.
Yeah. Do you have people to talk to?
Not really. I was an only child, and my dad was an only child. He had the one brother, and he's gone. And I'm just thinking, my dad could die tomorrow, and what do I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, death is scary, right? Because we've never done it before. And,
Yeah.
it's an unknown, but I know that for myself, I have peace knowing that because I know Jesus, I know where I'm going.
Okay.
And I've been forgiven of my debt. So that's what gives me peace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know all the situation that you're going through, but
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I sure wish you could feel.
Yeah, well, me too. Well, at least I know my uncle's in a better place.
Yeah, I pray so. Did he know God?
He talked about God sometimes, usually when he was mad, but
Sure. Yeah, no, and that's the hard thing is, I think sometimes it's good. You never know if somebody knew Christ at the end, because if you don't know Christ, the problem is it's not better. That's not a comforting thought to talk about at this moment, but it is important to know that if you don't have forgiveness of your wrongs before God, it isn't better. Not everybody goes to heaven.
So you're one of those that believes in heaven and hell, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
So where's my uncle?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know his heart, but it's definitely something that, in a time of pain like you are right now, it makes you think about death. And if he didn't know Jesus, then I would say he would be in hell. I certainly don't hope that, and I don't know anybody's heart, so I typically try to assume the best. And it was somebody in the Bible that was saved right when they were about to die.
Mm-hmm.
And so I typically wish that on people, and prefer to...
Well, I don't want to go to hell.
Yeah. You don't. I agree. Me neither. That's something that is the most important thing that you can do is to know Jesus. And so I'd be willing to introduce you if you like.
Okay. Well, can we get together again and talk about this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, hey, good to see you, Dan.
Yeah,
Get back to patience.
But anyways, you guys don't talk.
Sure.
Exactly.
Understand. Now, I use that illustration because 2 years ago I performed a funeral for Peg's aunt and uncle, neither of whom were believers. That's why she was laughing so hard over here. And one of the nieces came up to me, granddaughter, niece, Amy? Okay. Amy is Mormon, and Amy came up to me right before the service, and we were talking about her uncle, and she said, well, at least we know he's in a better place. Yes. Now, again, you got to pick the time and the place, and that was not the time or the place to have that ongoing conversation.
If you were my workmate, I probably wouldn't have taken the conversation that way.
Sure. What would you have done differently? What would you affirm? What do you do well?
One of the things you did well is ask questions.
Okay.
Try to understand your heart and where you were coming from. He will listen to the answers.
Okay.
You picked up on the cues that you were dropping, which was really good, which shows an intentionality.
Okay.
He was also, like when you offered to meet again, he was really quick to follow up and say, yes, like let's do that, let's set a time and place
Okay.
to follow up the conversation.
Okay.
It was bold and true that he turned the conversation to, well, not necessarily is everyone going
Yeah.
to a good place, but I also had, that backfired, well, I almost backfired, but I actually had a coworker he had baby triplets who died shortly after birth, all three of them. He was, of course, absolutely devastated. And he actually, at work, he asked me, well, why does your God let bad things happen to good people? He was raw, but I told him there's no such thing as good people.
Yeah.
And he basically walked away and never spoke to me again in his life.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, it was true, but was that the right thing to say right then?
Maybe not right then. It's true. Yeah, those are hard.
So I think another thing that he did as part of the skit, saying guys don't look each other in the eyes, but if you just take it from a point of intentionality, you can have a conversation with a guy in the yard while he's telling you, be careful, don't step in the dog poop, right? Or you can actually ask him to sit down and chat. Like, that just elongates the conversation, and quite honestly, as natural as it was here, it could be natural in your front yard too, right? So, hey, you got a few minutes to talk? Well, let's sit down in these two chairs as opposed to let's have this quick, fast, I got to get to the next thing conversation standing up, right?
Sure.
So like, let's
Yeah.
grab a
That's
coffee.
intentional.
Or,
Sure.
hey, do you want a beer?
Right.
I mean, it's just that easy.
Well, and that's where this is kind of a staged format, obviously.
Yeah.
So we're doing the best we can with.
Right. Whether the guy, and I know you might not all agree with this, but you grab a Coke, you grab a soda, you grab a water. Hey, man, we both been working out.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
grab a beer if he drinks a beer, but you
Sure.
just make the conversation more casual.
Sure.
Because everybody needs a break in the middle
Yeah.
of long work, right?
Exactly, that's what I was
So you make it really casual, and now you just create a longer opportunity.
So you're saying I should have walked past Rob's house yesterday?
I mean, both of us should have made a break. Let's get a break right now.
Well, and most of these conversations that we're going to have are either in a work context, they're in a neighborhood context, or they're in a leisure context. So I think about the three guys that I fished with on Friday. And that was a very leisurely day. I talked with one of the guys who I think probably all three of them would profess to be Christians, or at least have a faith of some kind. But I said to the one, because I know he hasn't gone to church since COVID started, I said, hey, did you make it to an Easter service in person this time? And he said, well, we went to visit my wife's mom who's in a nursing home, and they did a service there at the nursing home. And we had a chance to talk a little bit about that. And so, sometimes you can ask leading questions that will come around to some of those more spiritual things. Now, we saved the best two for last. So Helen and Peg, who wants to be the believer and who wants to be the unbeliever?
What did Ed wanted to say about that? your, was it uncle or whatever,
Yeah.
had done all those horrible things. And, you know, eventually that conversation will come up about, all have sinned. Everybody has, I have an uncle who's actually in prison right now for murdering people, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if people will say, well, he should roast in hell. I said, you know, that's not my decision, because
Sure.
when you talk about the thief that was on the cross, is it today you'll see me in heaven, okay? So nobody is beyond, and like you said, he didn't know the person's heart, he didn't know what would happen, because if
Sure.
you've got somebody who's like, had that kind of life experience and they're going to die, and you're like, or did die, you're like,
Sure.
well, then they're in hell, right? You just roasted. I don't know that.
Mhm.
I have no way of knowing that. So
Sure.
I think that's another thing that's kind of helpful when you get into those kind of situations.
So how many sins do I have to commit to condemn me to hell?
Exactly, you don't. I mean, one, exactly, well, exactly.
Okay.
You can be saved.
So we're going to let these two, and Helen, you're the
Believer.
believer, and Peg is the non-believer. Go ahead and read your...
You're the parent of a senior in college. Your child has grown up in church and went off to college with a strong faith. You've watched your child get involved in some activities in college that have pulled them from their faith. Some professors have said that religion is for the weak. You've been praying for the opportunity to share conversation of faith with your child. Your child has come home for the weekend. At the dinner table, your child states that they doubt God's existence now.
Oh, I'm a child. Oh, this is a Christian. You grew up in a strong Christian home. You went to college as a strong believer. However, you've gotten involved with some activities in college that have pulled you away from your faith. You have some professors that have told you that religion is only for the weak. You've gone home for the weekend. At the dinner table, you announced to your parents that you doubt God's existence now. Oh, it's nice to be home and have a home-cooked meal.
Well, I'm so glad you're home for this weekend. Now, what have these professors been saying to you?
That seems very realistic.
You know, I feel like I'm just being challenged in all my classes and even with the friends that I'm with, that a lot of the things that, you know, I've been taught by you and Dad maybe aren't making sense to me anymore.
Well, you grew up, and we've read the Bible, we've studied it, we've seen who God is in Scripture. You said that you believed in Him, that you recognized that you were a sinner, and He's forgiven you from those sins. What has caused you to think that that's not true?
Well, I guess part of it is just these people in my life that, you know, right now they have influence, I guess, and I'm listening to professors challenge my faith, and I know they were things you taught me, but I'm not sure I ever really understood them for myself, and so I'm at that place where I'm just asking questions, I guess.
Well, what are some of your questions? Do you still believe that there is a God?
Sure, I believe there's God. I'm just not sure that God would allow all these bad things to be going on in the world, and there needs to be more understanding of, you know, we should be helping everybody, and there should be more equality, and I'm really confused by, you know, that there are people that are being affected by bad things, and why would God allow that? And it's hard. I see kids that are really struggling with difficult things, and I didn't have that before. I didn't, you know, and so now I feel like I'm being exposed to the world, and I have a different perspective on what's out there. I feel like I was protected.
Well, let's go back to what kind of world did God create? When He first created the world, what kind of world did He create?
Well, I think I was taught it was perfect, but Adam and Eve messed it up.
That's right. And that was when sin entered God's perfect world. He didn't design the world to be like it is now. He designed it as a perfect place with communion with Him. But when Adam and Eve decided that they wanted to be in control, that's when everything changed. And that's why we have all these bad things going on the earth now. This is not God's fault. This is man's fault.
Okay, and we're going to stop it right there. We saved the best for last. on page 56 of the book Intentional, this was a very short chapter in Intentional, by the way. It says this: evangelism is a lot like swimming. You can't learn to do it if you don't get in the water. Practice won't make us perfect in evangelism, but practice can certainly enable us to say something clear and helpful. And just knowing that we can do that removes some of the fear. What do you think? What were some of the challenges?
I'm chuckling. I literally had a parent call me this past week saying, "Can you escort my child to chapel?" So that yeah, and we're not going to do that, but I'm actually meeting with this student later this week. But I just thought it was, because I get calls like this all the time. Parents are terrified, like, what are they teaching my kid?
Yeah.
And I'm, as a parent, probably your worst fear is, my child will turn away from the Lord.
Well, I think Peg brought up in that conversation maybe one of the most frequent and most challenging questions for us as Christians to answer. And that's, why would God allow bad things to happen in this world? Well, the question is, do you have an answer for that? Other than Matt's question that you're all sinners.
You cover people. That's you cover people. Say, well, no one's asking you. He's God. You answer to him. He doesn't answer to you.
Yeah.
But that hasn't won a person yet.
Dan?
I mean, it's a challenging question because there's a lot of assumptions that person has that
Sure.
are true. And you can't just point them maybe necessarily all out at once. So maybe you do have to draw the person out with different questions.
Sure.
Because usually these people have bitterness over this for a long time.
Sure.
So you have to find the weakness in the wall.
Sure.
And you find the weakness and go hit that point first.
Okay.
Right? Because if you
Okay.
hit them all at once, the wall's
Yeah.
going to go up stronger.
Yeah, I was talking with the chaplain for Grand Valley's football team yesterday, and the conversation got turned to the world sees God as loving. The Puritans saw God as just and holy and wrathful. Which of those are true?
Yes.
And it seems that we have a hard time bringing those two together to say, yes, God is loving, and yes, God is holy, and yes, God is merciful, and yes, God is just. And it seems that that's why that question, why would God allow good things to happen to, why would God allow bad things to happen to seemingly good people, is such a difficult question. So I think one of the things that we can do to be better prepared for that is to think through, if I'm asked that question, how would I respond? And maybe this is something that you could take to your dinner table and just do this role play kind of thing. I hope this hasn't just been a waste of time. I hope it's been something that we can take and we can think through, and what are some of the practical implications of all this, because we have the information. Hopefully we have the motivation. We've spent a few minutes practicing, but come tomorrow morning, Monday morning, when you show up at work, it's game time now. So hopefully you're ready for the game. Okay?
There's a really good book. It's a pretty entry level theological depthness, but it's called When God Goes to Starbucks by Paul Copan. I think that deals with it. It's like, how do you have conversations when you're trying to evangelize with things like this? Like, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? God in politics, God.
Sure.
And it's like, how do you navigate a conversation through that? Which I found was really helpful. I read that in college, and that really helped shape how I direct conversations to stand firm in my faith, but also empathize better with people.
Well, good.
Because ultimately, the root of the hurt for why does God let bad things happen to people is not in that phrase. It's something else.
Sure. number one, God wouldn't go to Starbucks. He'd go to Wild Roast because that's the Christian coffee shop.
This was before Wild Rose was created. I mean, the book is a little dated too.
Sure,
Or
sure.
317.
I was gonna say 317 to their mission.
So
Definitely not planned.
as you think about these scenarios and as you think about things that come up in your everyday work life, hopefully these things will allow you to practice through some of these scenarios and be prepared in advance to ask good questions and to maybe even have an answer for that question that somebody might ask you, because, you know, rarely is it off the cuff like we've done here. You know, it's usually you've had a relationship. It's not like Michael who's sitting on the park bench and Tim walks up and sits down. It's usually, you know, it's the guy at work who's in the cubicle next to yours, or it's the patient that you have, or whatever the case. So, well, hopefully this has been helpful, challenging. I know some of you were not real excited about doing this, but that's okay.